Budget 2025. Live from Ottawa, here are Omar Sachedina and Vashi Kapelos.
Good afternoon, everyone. A look at Parliament Hill on this bright and sunny fall day where we are about to learn the government's spending plan. Welcome to our special coverage of Budget 2025. We are inside the foyer of the House of Commons at this hour.
Hi, Omar. It's good to be with you. In the next hour, we're going to hear from Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne as he outlines what Prime Minister Mark Carney and he have called really a once-in-a-generational budget.
And actually what we know is that the government is walking really a tightrope, vowing to cut spending in some areas and also increase spending on some very big projects to try and diversify the Canadian economy. The economy, of course, battered, hit very hard by these sanctions that we're seeing from Donald Trump and the U.S.
Yeah, that is the backdrop to this entire thing, right? And certainly the selling point for the government. It's all about kind of fighting back against the trade war and reforming, in their words, or at least claim to reform the Canadian economies. Now, none of the opposition parties, and here's where it gets politically very interesting, have come out and said in advance of the budget that they're going to support it. None have explicitly ruled it out. But that does leave us in a position, because this is a minority government, where we could be looking at some sort of, perhaps, Christmas election.
And we can hear some applause happening behind us in the House of Commons. The sequence of events is as followed. We know that journalists and stakeholders have been spending most of the day poring over the budget. And in just a few minutes' time, when the lockup lifts, basically, we'll be getting the essentials of that budget document. As soon as the Minister of Finance rises in the House of Commons, we will be able to share some of the details, or all of the details, we should say, in that budget document. But just to go over some of the numbers, here is the state of affairs right now.
Yeah, just over a month ago, this is what we got from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. So that's kind of like the budget watchdog. He sounded a bit of an alarm over where the federal deficit could be headed, just based on some new spending measures that have been announced since the election. So he's looking at what was a projected deficit of $51.7 billion going toward $68.5 billion, or about 2.2% of the GDP. And that's a significant ratio, because that's the fiscal anchor that the Liberals promised during the election campaign. And I'll cut myself off, because here is Minister François-Philippe Champagne, the finance minister, standing up in the House of Commons to table the budget. We're going to listen in live as soon as he begins speaking, but as you mentioned, we can hear it in the foyer here of the House of Commons, a raucous level of applause from government benches, not from the opposition, from government benches. Let's take a listen.
He should be speaking momentarily. Here he is.
In both official languages, the budget documents for 2025, including the notice of Ways and Means motion. The details of the measures are contained in these documents. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I am requesting that an order of the day be designated for consideration of these motions, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I will give that to the clerk. Here.
Okay, so now that the finance minister has risen in the House of Commons, the embargo has been lifted. Let's get to CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver for the nuts and bolts of Budget 2025.
Nearly 7 months after getting elected, the Carney government has dropped its first budget, a 406-page book it promises will build Canada strong. Over the next 5 years, Ottawa intends to spend $141 billion in new measures that they project will bring in $51.2 billion in savings. Together, those measures will take Canada's deficit to $78.3 billion this year, dropping to $56.6 billion by 2029-2030.
It's well within the range that people had expected, and people also understand that 75% of what we recorded this year, you would have seen that at the very beginning, was to, defend our sovereignty.
One of the biggest expenditures, defense, with $81.8 billion in spending over 5 years. There's $20.4 billion for the military's recruitment and retention problems, $10.9 billion for upgrades, and $17.9 billion to expand new military capabilities, including procuring new armored vehicles.
It's a real big injection of money, but really interestingly, they don't provide any annual investment or expenditure total. There's no articulation of where year by year that would take us as a share of GDP.
There's also $51 billion over 10 years for a new Build Community Strong fund to help fund new infrastructure projects, $1.7 billion for an international talent attraction strategy, and $13 billion over 5 years starting in 2025-2026 for Build Canada Homes. That includes $2.8 billion for Indigenous housing. One way Ottawa is bringing down the deficit through changes to the public service. Ottawa wants to shed 28,000 public sector jobs within the next 3 years through cuts, attrition, and a move to incentivize voluntary leave and early retirement. How much that alone will save and where the cuts are coming from is unclear. Ottawa is also hoping to save $60 billion over 5 years through modernization and government efficiencies.
Canada's new government is spending less on government operations. Canadians understand that. You need to put the house in order.
But aside from a promise to review bank fees and to automatically file taxes for lower-income Canadians, experts say there's little that will help with affordability.
If you're the average Canadian, you're looking at this budget, you're going to say, well, it doesn't change my life very much. You know, I'm concerned about affordability, I'm concerned about housing costs, and lots of concerns. It doesn't really address any of those things specifically.
Instead, many economists say the budget's aim is to create a better environment for business through measures like a so-called productivity super deduction. The budget also sets the stage for the elimination of the oil and gas emissions cap, a move the industry and the provincial government in Alberta have been calling for as a way to encourage more investment in the sector.
This is a budget that focuses on capital investment because of the context that we are in right now. The economy is quite weak and is under attack because of the tariff issues, and we have a significant uncertainty in the Canadian economy, so businesses are not investing.
For the first time, the budget has been separated into capital investment and operational spending. By 2028-2029, this document anticipates that the operational budget will have a surplus of $1.7 billion. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
All right, those just the major highlights of Budget 2025, and some of the headline information there, Vashi, is that the deficit is now $78.3 billion, which far exceeds what the Parliamentary Budget Officer had said. And the Conservatives had said a few weeks ago that anything above $42 billion is not a budget that they could support. Now we'll see what happens. What happens in terms of the sequencing? We know that the House is not sitting next week, so the earliest that they could vote on this document is week after next. The Liberals are in a minority government situation. They've got 169 seats, of course, so they need support from outside of their own party for this document to pass. And if it doesn't, of course, there could be possibly an election in December. But what are some of the other things that stood out for you?
The deficit number is for sure primarily the big number in all of this. And the pitch from the government is going to be, we're going to spend all this extra money in excess. You know, if you look on the 5-year horizon, the cumulative deficit, another $167 billion bigger than was projected in the last fall economic statement at the end of last year. We're going to spend all that extra money in order to catalyze private investment. And they're estimating that they're going to catalyze over a 5-year period an extra $500 billion of private investment, which will buffer revenues over the long term. But even if you look out 5 years, the deficit that they're projecting then, and that's sort of where things stand at the moment, not if things get worse and CUSMA gets blown up or something like that, still at $56 billion, which is $6 billion more than it was projected to be this year. So we're looking at a significant amount of extra spending. I know they will say that it is there to buttress Canada against the threat from the United States and reform the economy, but there's going to be some pretty hard proof points to measure whether or not that actually happens.
Let's get to CTV's chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang, who is standing by. Mark Carney has used this term catalyze, Amanda, catalyze investment in Canada. But of course, so much of what Donald Trump has done in the past few months since being inaugurated is really cast a seed of doubt in Canada, right? That there's a lot of things are not predictable here, and that's driven, business away. Stellantis comes to mind right away. Has this budget so far, based on what you're seeing, been able to incentivize people to put their money in Canada and not only attract that investment, but make it stay here?
It's certainly aimed at that. It seems very clear that the aim here is to say, look, yes, we're racking up a deficit. It's a sizable one, but we're also going to attract private investment. The budget says it aims to attract $500 billion over the next 5 years. It is, of course, also promising cuts. It says says it will cut its own government operations by $60 billion over the next 3 years. That's a sizable number. There's a lot in here that will be attractive to business, including a new approach to environmental regulations, those emission caps on oil and gas in Alberta. And there are some extensions that were already in place, like the capital gains incentives that were in place, the capital investments, rather, by business, that will be attractive, Omar. The question is whether Canadians will feel as though there's enough in here tomorrow, next week, to offset the weakness of our economy, because we are dealing with, of course, a slowdown that's already underway that could get worse. Or is there enough here in the short term to actually create the aspects of growth so that the economy feels better? That I'm still pouring through the details, but I haven't seen anything that says, yes, there's the idea that will kickstart economic growth in Canada.
And what about even the more immediate, like, affordability concerns? Because you had raised this going in, right? The stuff that they were pitching heading into the budget and that we see in this budget is aimed at transforming the economy over the mid to long term. But Canadians are feeling, 30% higher prices over the last 5 years in the grocery store. I can't find anything in here, to my first glance, that is in addition to what they had already announced, which was making the the lunch program permanent, the tax cut that they announced upon their election, the consumer carbon tax. Like, beyond that, I don't see anything in addition.
I mean, I agree with you. A lot of it seems to be pre-announced. There will be details that I haven't seen yet. It's a big document. I'm going to pour through it, and we can sometimes let the big numbers obscure some really important numbers, right? If we're not talking billions, we think it's no big deal. There may be really good programs buried in here. I will say some of the things they've pre-announced are important. The extension to EI, for instance, will matter to a lot of people. The supports for those specific sectors that are very much under threat, including steel and aluminum, in place and very important. But it's true that if you were looking for kind of this slam dunk on this is going to help with affordability, it's not really here. On the other hand, there isn't really a silver bullet on that. The housing spending is material. It was pre-announced, but it's here. And then that infrastructure spending, what they're calling the communities strong spending, that could be material. Now, infrastructure cuts a couple of different ways. It can actually be bad for productivity in the sense that it can slow us down while it's underway. But it is good construction jobs, engineering jobs, and that can happen fast. That can be shovel-ready projects. So some of this may actually, we'll see what economists make of how quickly that can happen. Some of it may help spur growth. I'm with you, though. I'm looking at the fine print on where's the help for Canadians that really need it today in the face of everything that's going on.
Thank you. All right, Amanda Lang, thank you so much. We'll check in with you a little bit later. Let's get right now to Mustafa Askari. He's the chief economist for the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. And Mustafa, I know you've been poring over the document. I think it's something like 400 pages or so. You were in lockup. Let's pick up on that question that Vashi and Amanda were talking about just a couple of minutes ago. We know there's tons more spending on things like defense, but for the average person out there, are they going to walk away after hearing about this document and say, I feel better off after today? I have more hope in the future because my life is going to get more affordable?
I don't think so. I don't think this is a feel-good kind of a budget for average Canadian that they can feel this right away. This is more of a long-term vision for the government, that the economy needs to pivot from what we have had over the past 10 years, that we had the impact and focus on social safety net. Now we are pivoting to measures that would incentivize companies and private sector to invest in Canada so we can see a higher rate of growth and higher productivity. That's the aim, that's the goal of the budget. So no, I don't think the average Canadian will look at this budget and say, well, I'm better off right away. It may take some time before we see the impact of these measures, but that's exactly the vision of the government, is to prepare the economy and Canada for different kind of economic development and growth over time.
The interim PBO had said that this level of spending was unsustainable. I mean, based on the numbers that you've seen today, which exceeds even the previous projection. Again, the deficit projected to be $78.3 billion. Is it a sustainable level of spending?
I think it is still sustainable. I just actually did a back of the envelope calculation myself based on the sort of a system that you use for calculating fiscal sustainability. And we are we are going to see the debt to GDP ratio sort of stabilize over the next 10 years or so, and then comes down. If the government does not add a lot to its spending over time. I mean, if we maintain the current fiscal structure with the plan that the government has, we're still looking at a fiscally sustainable, in the long run, fiscally sustainable situation.
A lot of this, and you mentioned it, Mustafa, is aimed at growing the economy over the mid to long term to buttress some of the hits that the economy is taking right now and might in the future. You mentioned you identified productivity as key to that growth. The budget does the same thing. And they've got something in here called a productivity super deduction, basically a suite of tax measures aimed at creating that kind of growth and spurring productivity. Based on what you see and what they have outlined there, do you anticipate that will be the case, that will happen?
Well, productivity is really a major complex issue that nobody can really figure out exactly how you can actually do something to raise it. We have done all kinds of things over the past 20, 25 years to help increase productivity, including tax cut and other measures for businesses. It's a tough one to figure out and predict over time. They're doing the right measures to incentivize. If the firms come in and actually invest $500 billion over the next 5-10 years, yes, that will certainly increase productivity. But again, it is an if there. If what we have done here is sufficient for getting the private sector to come in and invest. And that is really the issue. But in principle, on paper, these are the measures that they needed to introduce and implement and see what happens. I don't think anybody can say for certain that productivity is going to increase, and by how much. None of us can say that.
Is there any way to know if that private investment will actually come? Like they're saying very conclusively, this will lead to $500 billion of additional private investment over the next 5 years. Is there actually any way to know that?
Not necessarily. I mean, if all the measures that they have introduced, if they implement those and go through it, and if private sector does not actually come and have enough confidence in the Canadian economy to invest in Canada, then we are in real trouble. Because that means essentially there is nothing the government can do really to incentivize and encourage private sector investment. But I think we have to sort of hope and accept that in principle those things should help investment in the future.
Okay, Mustafa, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your analysis. Appreciate it as always. Mustafa Askari is the chief economist for the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and Democracy. Let's turn over to get some more analysis now from former Chief of Defense Staff General Tom Lawson, who has been listening in as the budget is tabled. General Lawson, it's great to have you with us. I do want to start on because one of the big factors leading to the increased level of spending is defense. We have known for a while now that the government intends, they didn't campaign on it, but that they intend to meet that 2% target. We have a number now for over the 5-year horizon, $81.1 billion on a cash basis. That's a huge number. What does it mean in real terms to you as someone who oversaw our military for as many years as you did?
Well, I mean, if you divide that over the 5 years, Vashi, that they're talking about, it's about a 45% increase in the budget. So I think that anybody who is interested in defense and security of Canada, I would hope it would be most Canadians, would be very excited about the government's intent here. And of course, the skeptics who are out there would look at this and say, how is the government going to get this money out onto the street?
Do you have concern about that?
Well, I think so. I mean, you know, as a military leader myself, there's one thing that the leadership team is going to care about, and is this sustained investment over the next 5 years? And it looks like it is. The reason I say that is when you set a budget, the military with the deputy minister will go ahead and give you the maximum amount of military capability that they can within that budget. But then, as we've seen over the recent years, 5 to 10% of that budget has been retrieved and taken back to work against the deficit. And that's so critical. There are no off-ramps. So that money, if it is sustained, is going to be extremely important in carrying defense to a new place in many different ways.
General Lawson, what do you see as some of the major gaps? Because Annie Bergeron-Oliver mentioned in her budget item, when you look at things like submarines, I mean, there's still no money to allocate, that cash for 12 submarines. Each of them costs about $1 billion each. Seeing that gap, is that concerning for you?
Well, not really. Those very large procurements are amortized over decades that they're going to be in place. They're very, very expensive in accumulation. But I think what we're talking about here, first and foremost, and the government's given us some indication of where they want some of this money to go, they're recognizing that first and foremost, once this is a sustained amount of money over coming years, the first thing they need to deal with is people. And a couple of years ago, one of the defense ministers said that the Canadian Armed Forces were in a death spiral. A little bit of good news, they're no longer in a death spiral, but they're just kind of pulling out. This will be the first year in years that they're actually going to take in more people than they lose. But that's not good enough. They need to recover 10 to 15,000 people, and now there's talk about a reserve that would increase from 30,000 to 10 times that number or more. And for that, you need compensations and benefits and housing like the Auditor General spoke about, and we need to feed into these bases, the 30 bases across Canada that have suffered such rot out over those years. As part of those years I was in charge, we just didn't have any money to put into our infrastructure. So that will take billions of this amount that's been talked about right here, and then we get into some of those shiny things that will bring new and very important capabilities to the Canadian Armed Forces.
I'm glad you mentioned recruitment. We know that about $20.4 billion over 5 years of that $81 billion is going to be going to things such as recruitment and retention, including pay raises. We know that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who apply to try to be part of the CAF, but they don't make it in. Are you confident in the execution strategy? Because when it comes to these budgets, right, money is one thing. In terms of carrying out policy that actually yields a desired result, that's another thing. Do you feel that second part of that equation has been met, or we're on track to meet that?
Well, I think that the government took a big step when they raised compensation benefits by about 20% at the lower ranks a couple of months ago, and 7 to 8% up at the top level. That will make these careers, which I think are great careers, more marketable, more interesting to more people. Yeah, the Auditor General did say that the standards that the military seem to be applying has released so many of those people who might otherwise have been interested in coming in. I'm not concerned so much about that. I think the Armed Forces has to maintain high standards. They take the men and women they bring in and they take them to a very high technological level. So you have to maintain those standards. I think what you need to do is you have to make it easier for people to get into really good jobs, high-paying jobs that really make it as easy as possible for you to meet some of those things that are tougher, like moving with families into places that houses are very expensive. They're doing a lot of things online that weren't in place when I was Chief of Defense, creative ways to make it easier for you to join the military if you'd like to do so, that don't involve heading into a recruiting center as much and meeting the big, scary, burly sergeant, although you can still do that. And you may when you get to basic training. But I think there are a lot of things that are going to come in place that are going to, especially with this money we're talking about now, make these careers much more interesting to young men and women in Canada.
General Lawson, always a pleasure, and of course these men and women sacrificing so much of their lives in service to this country, and we will be honoring them next week on November 11th. Appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. I want to head to Tim Sesnick now, who is a tax expert, and to talk about what this means for the average Canadian. Is that Elizabeth May speaking?
It's Elizabeth May. I think we should head there first, if you don't mind. Let's listen in live, Tim, before we get to you.
I appreciate it. The Bloc Québécois, they listed 6.
And do
more in peacekeeping and more in helping for world health issues where the U.S. government's decision-making is going to cause an increase in HIV/AIDS, an increase in polio, an increase in deaths from malaria, we could stand up and start filling that space, and instead we're retreating. We're putting less money into overseas development assistance and more money into our military, which we support up to a point. But this is the question of why would we throw, in the same week that the Prime Minister said we were going to have to make sacrifices, they announced a $2 billion gift to the Darlington project, which they've already put on the fast-track C5 list. You need to know that that project, while owned by OPG, the companies that will benefit are General Electric and Hitachi and Kiewit Engineering from the United States and some Canadian engineering, of course, our old friends Atkins Realis, formerly known as SNC-Lavalin, and Aiken. But this is for a project that may never generate a single kilowatt of electricity because it's an experimental prototype that we don't have a single operating small modular reactor anywhere in any democracy in the world generating electricity. And yet to casually throw $2 billion to it when they've just said Canadians will have to sacrifice? Why do young Canadians have to sacrifice, and why does the next generation have to bear the brunt of our government today deciding in 2025 that our oil and gas cap is off, that we're not even going to mention that we're legally bound under the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions? It's not even mentioned in this budget.
What do you think of the Liberals actively courting Conservatives to cross the aisle?
Well, they don't have enough votes.
Sorry, just to jump on that, considering that they're doing that to cross the aisle and everything you've described about their approach to negotiations, I'll put in air quotes, do you have any confidence that Prime Minister Carney and the Liberals have any interest in negotiating with any of the other parties if they don't have the votes, that they're willing to take it or leave it and sort of walk away if you
Well,
guys...
I think put that question to Prime Minister Carney and to Finance Minister Champagne. We try to be constructive as Greens. We don't want to take partisan shots. That's why you can tell how I'm speaking about Chris D'Entremont. Most of the people in that House are friends of mine. I don't agree with many of them on policy choices, but we're open to having a conversation. It's too important to stick to our legally binding commitments than just to say, oh, okay, it became inconvenient to have a home energy retrofit program that worked extremely well, so well that it was oversubscribed. It's really effective in reducing greenhouse gases, putting people to work in installing the insulation and the things that you do that save money and make sense and reduce carbon are abundant. It's still the low-hanging fruit. And we're trampling over the low-hanging fruit to chase pipe dreams of new technologies that are super expensive and take a very long time to produce nothing.
You're welcome. All right, Green Party leader Elizabeth May not sounding too optimistic, too positive. We didn't have the benefit of exactly everything she had to say, and not explicitly saying that she won't support this budget or will, but talking about some of those emissions caps and basically saying that they don't go far enough.
Yeah, and not surprising, because the fact that they're removing the emissions cap, they signaled in this budget that they will, is not something she's happy about. She is just one seat, but you have to realize that they are just a handful of votes away from passing this budget. So whether she supports it or not is significant politically. And you also heard her reference something else. She got a question about the potential for a Conservative MP to either sit as an independent or cross the floor to support this budget. That MP, as reported very recently by Politico, is Chris D'Entremont, who used to be someone who ran for Speaker. He's a Conservative MP in Atlantic Canada, so that's something to watch politically as well. Does he end up crossing the floor to vote for this budget? We're trying to find out.
And again, just to give you a sense of how high stakes this is, the Liberals have 169 seats, so they need at least 3 more from another party to have this budget passed. The NDP has not ruled out, this is before the budget today, abstaining. So there's going to be a lot of politicking going on in the next couple of weeks to try to get, at least from the Liberal side, this budget document passed. So let's get back to Tim Susnick, who was so patiently waiting by before we had to interrupt. I'm going to ask you the question that we've asked several times to various guests. I mean, for the average family watching this, are they better ahead after today?
Well, if you're the average Canadian, you're looking to grab on something in this budget and celebrate. tolerate it. I think you're going to be a little disappointed here. It really seems to be a budget that's more focused on trying to promote business investment and improvements in productivity in the business sector. Now, having said that, there are a few things in the budget that were mentioned. Now, some of these things were things that were referred to previously, been announced previously, and there's a couple things that are new. But as far as what was previously announced, there was the middle class tax cut, which was a drop from 15% to 14%, which was announced earlier this year. That's going to put an extra $30 a month in the pocket of most Canadians, so it's not going to make anybody wealthy, but it's a move in the right direction. There was also an elimination of GST on new homes up to $1.5 million in value for first-time home buyers. That was announced before, but they're just reiterating that, hey, this is out there, and if you're looking to buy a new home and you're a first-time home buyer, this could be good for you. And they also mentioned that the National Food Program is going to be made permanent. Something that they announced in the last month or so. So those are some of the measures that were previously announced. And there are a couple of new measures that are, I think, worth mentioning here. I think, for example, there is an automatic tax benefit now available to low-income Canadians. Now, what I mean by that is many low-income Canadians are not receiving the benefits they're entitled to, like Canada Child Benefits, like the GST, HST credit, because they don't file tax returns. And they should be filing to collect these benefits. So the government has said, look, we want you to get these benefits, so we're going to file your tax return for you effectively if you don't do it yourself, and using information they have on file, and then they will send you your benefits. So for some people, that actually may help. There's also a move to try to make the application for disability benefits a little easier. Right now, you have to apply to get status as a disabled individual for purpose of our tax law, and it's a costly procedure and it takes time. So what the government is doing is they're offering a benefit payment of $150 now to enable you to cover the cost of applying for this benefit. So that's positive for some people where that may apply to them. And one of the last things that the government has said is that they're going to look at bank fees. So there was no announcement about any particular law they're going to bring in about bank fees, but, for example, email transfer fees, if you're transferring funds by email, or the ATM fees that we pay when we go to a bank machine. So these are fees they'll be looking at. I call them junk fees, but if the government can actually do something to help reduce these fees, that's going to be good for the average Canadian. But as far as what's out there, what's in this budget for the average person, that's
Tim, I have to interrupt you. We've got Yves François Blanchet standing by the PQ.
Non négociable pour la suite des choses.
For what comes next, and is not found in Mr. Champagne's budget or Mr. Carney's budget, which very probably was used a lot of crayons. So there is no end of this Justin Trudeau heritage when it comes to the discrimination for seniors. Let's understand here, those who are retired 65 to 75 years old will continue to get the old age pension that is less than those who are 75 plus, and in all associations, even those people who represent seniors, is that this discrimination doesn't make sense. There's a deficit of $78 billion and does not take the time to fix an injustice, even though they turn their back to the Trudeau era. It is still the same government. So the demand of the Bloc for the transfers in health, so that the increase of health transfers could cover the increase of the system paid by the Quebec taxpayers as well as all Canadian provinces, is also a refusal. Therefore, year after year, the Quebec government will continue to dig an inability to pay the increase of the systematic healthcare system costs, and that's true as well elsewhere in Canada. As well as for infrastructure, $150 million announced, including $9 billion are new money. $9 billion over 5 years. What are you going to do with that when the needs are a multiple of that just in Quebec? So this announcement on its face is not serious. Also, the lack of details, the general opacity of the whole budget, but also the measures when it comes to infrastructure, how can I say this, is close to going over the ability of Quebec. When I'm thinking of our young households, we've asked for a program to guarantee loans to facilitate access to the initial deposit for the purchase of a new house for young households. That has been refused by the Carney-Champagne duo. And the first program for financing housing does not establish that the part that would normally go to Quebec will be given to Quebec without condition. Finally, let's remember that Mr. Carney, 1 week before the elections, gave a $4 billion gift for a carbon tax that he wanted to reimburse when no one had actually paid for it. He gave that gift a week before the election, $4 billion that we want a reimbursement in Quebec, the Quebec part of that $800 million. That is not in the budget either. All the requests from the Bloc have not been met. The consequences of that are known. I want to mention that even with the current trend to pretend like climate change doesn't exist and it's not going to cost billions of dollars to Quebecers to adapt to climate change, to fix the damage of climate change. Just think about the fires, the floods. Well, the total of money invested in climate is $4 million. And I didn't make a mistake here. It's not $4 billion, it is $4 million. The rest of that amount goes to critical metals, which goes into industry, which doesn't tell us it's for the environment. Also, the tax credits that meant that over 10 years, the Canadian government gave approximately $8 billion per year to gas and oil is extended up to 2040. No one on the Liberal benches will imagine that we'll take climate change seriously. It doesn't exist. This will be incredibly expensive. We are going to have catastrophe and we'll have to pay for them. And this government says climate change doesn't exist. We are not putting money in this. Obviously, the deficit. Saying that it is creative does not give justice to the smoke and mirrors we are seeing today. The deficit is of $78 billion, period. The government says that $45 billion of the $78 billion are investments. Ask any accountant, ask any business that will probably have to pay more employment insurance. Ask any accountant if an investment isn't supported on an asset. Well, the government, and this is fantastic, they give tax credits in the assets. It is just about anything and put in the assets to say, look, it's an investment. It's not an investment in the social way we're investing in our kids for the future. No. Listen, it's an investment, so it should be supported by something that you have, something that you own, an asset that you put on your sheet. There is nothing in this budget that justifies this amount. This is a flat deficit, normal deficit, but much bigger by $78 billion. And do not kid yourself. You're not going to get a check for this, but you need to go and pay it. Citizens of Canada and Quebec will have to pay for that deficit. If it had a major impact in terms of adapting to context, sure, but the amounts here are relatively negligible. I'm not saying there's nothing there, but it's not at all at the height of the challenge, because let's remember that now we are adding a lack of success of the budget to the Carney government, if not a total failure.
Not explicitly saying as well whether he and his party will or won't support the budget, but leading us down a path that Elizabeth May did to reasonably reach the conclusion that they are leaning against supporting the budget. He went over a number of different things. Number one, seniors, that had been a priority. They wanted to see a boost to OAS for 65 to 67-year-olds. Clearly that wasn't, and the government never signaled, to be fair, that that was in it. And also climate, same thing as Elizabeth May, signaling, he says, a real retreat on climate policies through announcements in this budget. And then finally, the size of the deficit, which I imagine when we hear from the leader of the Conservative opposition, and Pierre Poilievre, he will be sounding an alarm over the size of the deficit.
And let's not forget, Blanchet had a series, dozens of demands heading into this budget. I think he had something like half a dozen priority areas. But again, like Elizabeth May, not sounding very optimistic about the budget. We want to take a moment right now just to review what we know about today's budget and what it all means for you. Here are the headline numbers. The deficit, as we've been mentioning, for the current fiscal year clocks in at $78 billion. That is up $36 billion from the projected deficit in the fall economic statement. The deficit peaks this year before declining to $56 billion in 5 years. The government notes that the debt to GDP ratio is declining over that 5-year horizon as well, which is Ottawa's new fiscal anchor. And the budget outlines $32 billion in what they call new capital spending over the next 5 years. And this is distinct from what they call operational spending. The first time this has happened in a budget, which, as the Finance Department says, is the cost of the day-to-day functioning of the federal government. The Prime Minister promised during the federal election campaign to balance that federal operational budget in 3 years. Budget 2025 projects they will achieve that goal, posting a surplus of $1.7 billion in 2028. And actually, the public service, the public sector, this was massive, right? Not only are many of these constituents in Mark Carney's own writing, but today he was able to telegraph just how much downsizing we're seeing. I mean, when you compare the number to 2015, the public service has swelled by about 100,000, 10,000 fewer than last year, but still overall up. And today we're seeing what steps they're going to take.
Yeah, so they're saying that they're going to cut, as you saw there, 28,000, I think it's 16,000 positions, but they're offering an early retirement incentive if you've got 25 years or you're 50, and it's apparently a very generous retirement incentive. My guess is they're not going to have to do a whole lot of cutting when you combine attrition and that. And 16,000 is not as big as they could have gone, right? The finance minister last week was signaling, hey, we want to get to pre-pandemic sustainable levels. I think that would involve a cut closer to 80,000 jobs, and they're not even projecting somewhere close to that 5 years out.
We've been talking a lot about what this budget means to you. We've got standing by right now to talk a little bit more about the affordability crisis. Liz and Miles Landry in Halifax, a young couple who have been renting for many years, and they've been trying to buy a home. And even though, Miles and Liz, we've seen successive tax cuts or rate cuts, I should say, from the Bank of Canada, home ownership, especially in hot housing markets such as Halifax, is out of reach for many Canadians. We're just curious to know, based on what you are hearing today, and again, this is 400 pages. We don't expect you to have gone through it in 40 minutes. But are you feeling positive after today, or are you still uncertain? I mean, do you feel like you can buy a home after today?
No, I don't feel like I can buy a home after today. I'm glad to see some money announced for building new homes, and the good part about those measures being announced before is that I have already had a chance to look at them. So it's interesting to see conversations happening about some non-market solutions to our housing crisis, but I was very disappointed to see that to the extent of it being announced. I know Miles and I talk a lot about this dream of having really just an ordinary Canadian life, and it's been so very far out and so very unattainable. And today people talk about how we need to do all of this investment in business and industry today so that we can reap the benefits in the future. It feels like my life is being put permanently on hold, and I'm a little exhausted by it.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you both, how does it feel to experience that sentiment that what you want, just that ordinary life, is out of reach? How does that feel?
But the key point there is certainly it's stressful a lot of the time. It's scary. It's also kind of just exhausting.
Yeah.
Because anytime it seems like something might be getting better,
audio.
there's actually no certainty. Given the volatility of the market and the fact that nothing really seems to be changing in it, that it might never be attainable, or might just keep getting further and further out of reach.
It feels like we've been working for a very long time, and saving for a very long time, and the dream of having a family home and having an ordinary life just remains out of reach, unfortunately.
Is there anything you think that a government could do that would help bring it a little bit more within reach? Is there anything that you would have liked to have seen?
Absolutely. I would have loved to see some pretty clear to the housing process. I would love to see a definition of housing as well. Now, that might not be super necessary in a budget announcement, but a lot of the time when we talk about affordable housing, we end up talking about things that are below market rate. The market rate is completely out of control for people who are in the middle class. So below market rate ends up being unaffordable. I also really would have loved to see some discussion about benefits for seniors. A lot of seniors rely on their home equity as part of their retirement plan, and that's not sustainable. You can't run an economy on people selling houses to each other. And if people don't have anything affordable to downsize to, then this whole retirement plan doesn't end up working out. So I'm a little disappointed to see that. I also would have loved to see, and this was maybe a bit of a pipe dream, but some real conversations about green solutions and the green transition of our economy. If we were able to really invest in green energy and green jobs, I think that that could be an opportunity for us to grow our economy in a sustainable way that has a direct tie-in to housing. We need to build houses sustainably, and we need to have a sustainable future.
Just very quickly, your reaction to the deficit number of $78.3 billion. We know that the government is projecting it'll pay $19.8 billion more in public debt charges over the next 5 years, which is things like interest, for example. Do you feel as though that's something that's a tab that you'll have to eventually pay, or that perhaps your children will have to eventually pay?
Probably. I think I would be more amenable to large deficit numbers if I felt like there were real investments in social supports and in the future for young people and the next generations. And instead, I'm seeing lots of really big military numbers and not really a whole lot of new numbers for housing. I mean, there's some things to be hopeful for, but it's a big price tag, and I'm not seeing the value for the price tag, I think.
All right, Liz and Miles Landry, thank you so much, and we're wishing you the best of luck. I know it's a tough go for so many Canadians, and especially young Canadians out there, so we'll be thinking of you. Thank you.
If you're just joining us now, the federal budget, thank you. The federal budget has been tabled. We now know the size of the projected deficit, $78.3 billion. The government is saying most of that will go towards catalyzing private investment through government direction or government investment of their own. They are contending with a trade war that we are in the middle of with the United States, sectoral tariffs that have been very punishing on steel, aluminum, and of course the auto sector. Lana Payne is the president of Unifor, the union that represents tens of thousands of auto sector workers in this country. Lana, what's your first read? Anything significant in this budget that you think will go toward addressing the needs rather of the people you represent?
Well, in addition to the auto sector, we have about 320,000 members, Vassie, who work in all parts of the economy, and really a lot of that economy is under stress right now. So we needed to see a budget that was going to fight back and obviously spend on important things. And by spending on important things, I mean building things in Canada. We're seeing a fair bit of that in terms of the capital investments that we're seeing announced in this budget. But we have to make sure two things happen, and that is Canadian jobs are delivered from those investments, Canadian content is used, steel, aluminum, all of the inputs, so that we are actually strengthening our industrial base. At no time in our history have we needed to do that more, given the trade war we're currently experiencing.
Ms. Payne, what more specifically, you've touched on this a little bit already, but what more specifically would you have liked to see in this budget to offer more supports to auto workers who really are on the front lines of this trade war?
Yeah, well, we had obviously before the budget a $5 billion strategic fund that had been announced for the auto sector. There is still a good chunk of funding there that can be used to support the auto industry, and we expect it to be used, every dollar of it, to make sure that we're keeping production in Canada and supporting the entire auto industry. We also represent workers across the forest sector. It was really important to see, basically trying to match these two crises that we have in our country. One being the forest sector itself going through a crisis, and that being that they're paying tariffs, they're paying softwood duty, lumber duties on everything that they send to the U.S. And the second part of that is we have an affordable housing problem in this country, which your guests just spoke to. And the reality is we need to make sure that we're building homes and affordable homes for Canadians. And so I really hope that this strategy gets us there. There are a couple of other important things around procurement and building things in Canada. We've seen this massive infrastructure fund, and the reality is we need to make sure that we're building transit right here in Canada. We're building planes right here in Canada. We're building ships right here in Canada, so that we can ensure that Canadians are benefiting from the procurement dollars that we're spending right now.
Just one final quick question for you, Lana, about the reality. And I know you're representing, obviously, workers across multiple sectors, but we speak to you most frequently about the auto sector, and it has been in particular under siege by the Trump administration. This budget comes on the heels of a breakdown in negotiations with the U.S. But even when those negotiations were ongoing, we were getting strong signals from the feds that the auto sector tariffs were not up for negotiation at this point in time. The forestry sector tariffs were not up for negotiation. When you look, ahead at what the auto sector in particular is facing right now, like, what are you most worried about?
Well, I think the reality is that we're not doing a lot of talking with the U.S. right now, and that's probably not a bad thing, because the reality is we need a trade deal that works for all of our sectors, and carving it out to try and get a deal on.
From coast to coast to coast, we have skyrocketing prices in groceries and rent. And housing as an ownership proposition is simply out of the question for too many people. We have unemployment at 10-year highs, particularly hard for young people, where 1 in 6 young people is out of work, and many more than that are underemployed. Economic growth is weak, and of course we face serious problems from south of the border. So it is in that context that we're evaluating this budget today. I can tell you that New Democrats are going to take the time to study this budget. We're going to consult with stakeholders. We're going to talk to Canadians, particularly working Canadians, and review this budget to see if this budget passes our lens of whether it works for working Canadians. So I'll happy to take any questions you may have.
Is this an austerity budget?
It's hard to tell at this point. What I'll say is it's got a very large deficit. Spending is up in many ways. There are some record investments, but it also is, cutting public services that Canadians need. So this is something that we'll be taking a very close look at.
I know it's still early, but... Are you whipping your caucus on a vote, or will this be a free vote?
Traditionally on confidence measures, parties vote along party lines. So that's the tradition of our party. I wouldn't expect it to be any different.
I know it's still early, but was there any red line there in the budget so far that you've seen that it disqualifies you? Like, I know it's still early stages, but it seems like you're saying we need time to digest it, so there isn't an immediate red line that you said that would disqualify you guys from supporting it.
That's an excellent question. And one of the reasons I opened up with the serious problems we're facing is that there's complex issues that are facing us, and I don't think that we can oversimplify whether policies are going to respond or not. So I'll tell you a few things that we like about the budget. There's $51 billion in infrastructure spending, and that's linked to unionized jobs or community benefit agreements, which requires that work to be done through wage prevailing rates. So that could create good family-sustaining jobs, which has been a priority for the NDP. We talked about, campaigned on, an east-west clean electricity grid. That's mentioned on page 1 of the budget. And there's a specific mention of co-op housing, something that is near and dear to New Democrat hearts and something that we push for all the time. Some of you, none of you look old enough, but the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation was our predecessor, so co-ops are built into the DNA of the NDP. That's in there.
All right, interim leader Dan Davies, who is in a very, very interesting spot right now, right, Vashi? Because the Liberals, as we've been mentioning, have 169 seats. Before today, and we should lead with the news, he's basically not saying whether or not he will support this budget. He's talking about aspects of the budget that he supports, such as the infrastructure spending linked to unionized jobs, but not committing whether those 7 NDP members will vote one way or the other, because before today he actually even said that abstention was even a possibility. Yeah. So, you know, basically he was saying, well, we'll think about it, we'll see what happens, but holding his cards very close to his chest right now.
I would say I sort of have the feeling after listening to that he's left the door wide open to supporting the budget. I think if he wanted to call it a budget of austerity, he would have led with that. A reporter asked him point blank, is this an austerity budget? He said, not sure. Like you pointed out, he came out of the gate kind of in support of the infrastructure aspect of this budget. So to me, there's enough there that it sounds like he could be someone who supports it. The real question, as you point out, is that he's saying, well, traditionally we all voted the same way, so I would expect it, but certainly wasn't saying emphatically, like, I'm going to whip this vote no matter what. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I would say that's not if he had come out and said, no, we might be headed toward an election, it would have been that concrete.
And speaking of election, let's talk to the founder of Nanos Research, Nick Nanos, who is also the chief data scientist. So, of course, the hypothetical possibility, and you know, a lot of us are surprised that we're even talking about this before Christmas when we should be, you know, looking for gifts and preparing our dinners, although perhaps it's a little bit early, is that Canadians could be heading to the polls, right, if this budget document doesn't pass. Give us, you know, where things stand. How are the leaders doing right now in terms of their polling?
Well, you know, when we look at the ballot numbers, it's a statistical dead heat between the Liberals and the Conservatives. There's only 2 percentage points or thereabouts between the two front-running parties. Omar probably sounds very familiar to election night for me, you, and Vashi when we were looking at that close race when it comes to ballot support. That said, when you map them out or model them out in terms of seats, the Liberals have the advantage. But if an election were held today, we'd probably still have a Liberal minority government. But what they're probably hoping for is that on the leadership front, if there were an election, that they'd have the advantage, because Mark Carney has a significant advantage over Pierre Poilievre currently as to who Canadians would prefer as Prime Minister, upwards of like 20 percentage points or thereabouts.
Can we talk a little bit about the NDP? We just heard from the interim leader, Don Davies. I was mentioning with Omar. He didn't sound like he was the person who was on the verge of forcing the fall of the government. What is at play for New Democrats right now, based on what you see out there in your polling?
Well, they've got to survive. You know, the thing is that the support for the New Democrats is still in the low teens. It's lower than it historically has been. You know, usually the New Democrats have been anywhere from like 15, you know, and when times are well, like to the low 20s. And, you know, they're below their historical level that they have been at. They were just coming off an election where they were devastated. There's not a lot of money in the bank for them. They're without a leader. I think they're realistically, if there are candidates for parties to abstain or kind of create a situation for the Liberals to survive a confidence vote in the coming weeks, the NDP have to be at the very top of the list.
Any big surprises in this budget for you, Nick?
Well, you know what? I might look at things a little differently. It's clear that the federal government is focusing on infrastructure, but the big question is how long will it take for this infrastructure spending to actually have a materially positive impact on the day-to-day lives of Canadians? And Omar, and will that jive with when the next election is? Because, you know, the thing is that with the uncertainty about tariffs, with people worried about their jobs, with many Canadians struggling to pay for the groceries, they're thinking about, you know, not how strong or weak the economy might be in 3 or 4 years when all this infrastructure spending kicks in. They're thinking about, how am I going to pay for the groceries this week? And I think for the Liberals, that's going to be the balancing act. Persuading Canadians to to continue through these uncertain times and worried about paying for the bills, knowing that they'll have to wait to see how the positive impact of this infrastructure spending will be and how big an impact that might be.
Are you surprised at all that there wasn't a few more goodies in there that would have addressed exactly the issue that you're laying out in the more in the immediacy versus let's wait 5 years for some of this to trickle down?
Yeah, actually, I'm quite surprised. Like, you know, if the Canadian economy was a patient, I don't think we've understood what the pain management in the short-term strategy is for the Liberal government. I think the Liberal government have a particular diagnosis. They have a plan for the long-term health of the patient, if that's the economy. But in the short term, how are they going to deal with pain management? And you know what, Vashi, pain management is critical to the survival of any government, especially a government that's in a minority situation.
Great point. All right. Thanks, Nick. Nick Nanos is the founder and chief data scientist of Nanos Research. Of course, also our pollster of record.
And let's get to our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang, right now. Let's pick up a little bit, Amanda, for some final thoughts from you about what Nick just talked about. Obviously, these are promises, and the execution strategy can take years, if not decades. And Canada seems to be right now in an existential moment, at least for the tens of thousands of workers whose jobs depend on the trading relationship with the U.S. Does this budget address those concerns in the short term?
Omar and Vashi, I've had a chance to look at it, and the centerpiece of this budget, as far as I'm concerned, is what the government is calling productivity and competitiveness, $110 billion of spending. And in there are all of the signs of the folks that put this budget together, the business leaders of Mark Carney and Tim Hodgson and the like, because it is a suite of tax incentives that are very material. They expect that to spur spending and investing by business of $500 billion in this country, and it will come immediately, and it could come very fast. So the business investment that's been missing, they have crafted a suite of tools that they hope to get it here. There's a whole host of new planning around upping our export diversification. There's actually a new strategic exports office. They're going to be spending on key infrastructure for exports through transport. There's billions of dollars spent that way, and a whole lot of new support through EDC, $25 billion of it, to help businesses get overseas to new markets. So taken together, the business part of this budget is actually, it's not about affordability, but when we're talking about how you create growth, it's in here. Will it work? Maybe. Will it come at a cost? Yes. But for instance, those tax credits the government thinks will cost less than $3 billion a year, but generate at least $10 billion a year in economic output. So this is material stuff. It may be boring, but I think this is really the important stuff that will make a difference.
All right, thanks so much, Amanda. And Power Play, a special edition of Power Play is coming up right here from the foyer in just a moment. And Omar, I know you've got a lot on the go as well.
We have lots more coming up on CTV National News. And thanks, of course, for joining us. And we'll see you a little bit later.
And welcome to a special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos, coming to you from the foyer of the House of Commons on this, I think it's Tuesday evening. The federal government has just tabled its budget, one that they have categorized as a once-in-a-generation budget. Here is Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne standing up in the House of Commons to deliver the news.
Bold and swift action is what is needed. To weather the storm of uncertainty, we will not lower ourselves, Mr. Speaker. Quite the opposite. We will raise them to catch the winds of economic change because we believe in Canada.
There is a lot for us to unpack from both a policy and political perspective. The politics of this budget has been a focus now for a number of days in the lead up to it. Will it force an election? That is going to depend on whether the government is able to garner enough support from opposition parties. And to that end, we are going to speak to all of them. The interim leader of the NDP, Don Davies, will be here. The Conservatives House Leader, Andrew Scheer, will be here as well. And so will Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. First, though, to the details of this budget, the headline numbers that you need to know. The big one, of course, is the deficit, which is going to come in at $78.3 billion. Far higher than was projected at last year's fall economic statement, and even far higher than projected just a number of weeks ago by the parliamentary budget officer, who said it could top out in the neighborhood of $65 billion. It will instead run at about $78 billion. There's lots of other stuff in here, though, that leads the government to that number. And for more details on what you need to know about what's in this budget, I'm joined live by our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang, who has spent the last hour, as soon as that embargo lifted, going through the details of what's in it. I know we just finished the special and you were flagging some of the incentives that the government is putting in place that they say will spur economic growth and productivity. In layman's terms, why do you think that is so important?
So the interesting thing to me about this budget, Vashi, is they did pre-announce a lot of the things that we would say fall into the affordability kind of bucket. They're building more homes, trying to help on the housing file. They'd already done that income tax for middle-class Canadians, although they kind of reiterated here it's costing about $28 billion. But it is that Canada's productivity problem, our economy was already facing some weaknesses, and they're addressing it in this budget, and they're doing it in a way that's very aggressive. I mean, when the finance minister says we're putting up our sales, they're making a big bet, and the bet is if you create an environment for investment, people will come, and the investment will happen. Business investment in Canada has been falling for decades, and it costs all of us. So they're going to spend by creating tax incentives. There's a whole host of them across a whole range of different categories. It's immediate depreciation. So if you're a business person, you get the credit immediately. It really incentivizes you to do it. Will it work is the question. It's very bold. They're also spending, Vashi, in a way that I think is very important on trade diversification, and they put very specific kind of strategies around that, trying to get big businesses to diversify, working on our transport corridors, digitizing our ports, digitizing our infrastructure around transportation. Those are all really important investments and may actually spur economic activity in this country in the short term. We will focus, of course, on the deficits, and they are saying there will be cuts to the civil service. That will be painful, and that may actually, be a drag for a bit of friction on the economy, of course. But what they're also saying is they think that the investment here will attract 3 times the capital that they're spending, that private capital will crowd into the Canadian economy. It's a big gamble, Vashi, but it's clearly, to me, that's the centerpiece of this budget. It's not about building homes. It's not about pipelines to Tidewater. It's about fixing Canada's productivity problem, which has been around longer than you've been alive.
Okay. I think that's true. All right, Amanda, thanks so much for your perspective. I appreciate it. Our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang. And if you look at the bottom of your screen on the ticker there, you will see each of the details of the budget, the ones that we have deemed, of course, after looking through this 400-page document, the most important to convey to you. And we're going to unpack those details throughout the hour. This is, however, a political show. The budget, while it's a policy document, is also inherently a very political document. And so we've got to get reaction to what's in this budget and what isn't in this budget from opposition parties with whom the fate of this budget rests, right? Because this is a minority government, the Liberals have to secure support from opposition parties in order to pass the budget and in order for there not to be an election anytime soon. To that end, I'm joined live here by the interim leader of the New Democrats, Don Davies. Mr. Davies, a pleasure to see you as always. I appreciate you making the time.
Great to be here, Vashi.
Do you know if you're going to support this budget?
We don't yet. We just got a lockout about an hour ago. We haven't had a chance to meet as a caucus yet, which we'll be doing tonight. We plan on studying the budget and really understanding it tonight, and then we'll meet tomorrow morning and start having our political discussions. And we also want to check with some stakeholders and hopefully talk to Canadians, particularly working Canadians, and find out whether this budget's responsive to their needs.
You had identified coming into the introduction of this budget, primarily you didn't want to see a budget of austerity, which a few months ago was one of the ways in which the Prime Minister had described it, much less now. And you wanted to see enough on the investment side of the ledger. They have maintained all the social program spending that they had indicated that they would, the transfers to individuals, the transfers to provinces, the lunch program, the dental care program, a whole host of other programs that had been put in place under the previous government. Is that enough to signal to you that the concern you had expressed was taken seriously?
Well, I always think it's important to contextualize this budget a little bit. We haven't had one in 18 months, and the country's facing, I think, very serious economic issues. Unemployment's at 10-year highs, particularly hard for young people, 1 in 6 people out of work. We have skyrocketing prices and everything from groceries to rent. Economic growth is weak, and we have, of course, our serious problems from south of the border. So serious affordability issues, and our economy, I think, is I do agree with the Prime Minister, it's at a bit of a crossroads. So we want to see a budget that has investments. And so this budget is a complex one. There's things in there that we like and things in there that we don't like. and we're going to be taking the time to kind of evaluate them and see where it comes out in the balance.
On principle, though, can you acknowledge that a $78 billion deficit does signal that the government leaned way more toward investment than to austerity?
Yeah, and let me say, I'll give you some things I like and some things I don't like. So there's $51 billion announced in infrastructure spending, and it's at least notionally tied to unionized work or community benefit agreements, which is wage prevailing rate. So that meets one of the NDP's calls, which is good union jobs to be created with taxpayer dollars. The east-west electricity grid is mentioned on page 1 of the budget, which is something we campaigned on. And finally, there's a specific box and highlight of co-op housing, which is something the NDP has long fought for. On the negative side of the ledger, you've got cutting 40,000 public sector jobs. And, you know, when you have a jobs crisis, putting 40,000 well-paying jobs or people out of work is going in the wrong direction, we think. And behind every person is a service. So, you know, do Canadians want to wait 6 months to get a passport? You want to wait 3 months to get your call back from CRA, or seniors waiting to get their OAS checks? I don't think so. And
do you think that's true, though, just if I may interrupt for a moment? Because if you think back 10 years or pre-pandemic, pre-pandemic era, when the size of the public service was substantially smaller than it is now, were passport services that much worse? Were services at the CRA that much worse? My goodness, the Auditor General, even with this level of employment, is signaling that you can't even get a right answer if you're lucky enough to get through. So is it that quid pro quo, that the amount of people working for the public service is directly correlated with the level of service that Canadians retain? Because I would contend that it's not.
Well, there's a number of factors that go into that. For one thing, I think the public service had been cut prior to that, so I think it had been growing back to its natural state. Also, the population has grown significantly in the last 6 years.
The public service far outpaces population.
It does, but also so have the programs. For instance, we didn't have dental care. Didn't have the Canadian Dental Care Plan 5 years ago either. So there's been an increase in services. You know, when I see that CRA, their answers are correct to Canadians only 17% of the time, that doesn't tell me that we have too many people working in CRA. So I do think that it's important to, you know, put that in context. The couple other things I would say I don't like about the budget are they're getting rid of the empty homes tax, which was a measure aimed at particularly foreign investors who bought, you know, homes for investment purposes and left them empty when we have a housing crisis. So this tax kind of was encouraging them to put those housing units into the market. So this government inexplicably is removing that, which I would guess will take those houses out of the market. That's the wrong direction to go in. And finally, there's no digital services tax. You know, at a time when we have a revenue problem, Vashi, and this government says we have to cut and make sacrifices, why are we not taxing the biggest U.S. tech companies in the world? We're talking Mark Zuckerberg.
Because it put it us at odds with Donald Trump and with Joe Biden. Because it put us at odds with a U.S. government in both cases that was taking, in this case I should say, is taking direct aim at us.
Yeah, well, that's why I like a budget that satisfies Canadians, not one that satisfies Donald Trump. And I think it's going to take some political guts in this country. It's a tax that the Liberals have worked on since 2021. It raises $1 billion on profits made by those companies in Canada, over $20 million. I don't think it's too much to ask that those tech giants pay some tax on the money that they make here in Canada from Canadians. It's a political choice, but when you have a revenue problem, you can either ask Canadians to tighten their belts and you can lay off public sector workers, or you can tax Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. I would rather tax those people.
How serious are you about those concerns? Are you willing, as a party, to put, you know, to not provide your support to this budget, therefore leaving the country, and I'm not blaming you, but I'm saying that that's your right, therefore putting us in a situation where we're in another election? Or will you put the interests of your party, which is, you know, by objective measure, nowhere near a place where most would want to be to contend an election, will you put those interests ahead of the ones you just spelled out for Canadians?
Well, we're going to honor the lens that we announced from the beginning, which is we're going to analyze this budget through the lens of whether it's good for working people in this country.
But you've just told me it isn't.
No, I haven't said that it isn't. I've said that there's a number of factors on the plus side and the negative side, and you know, we haven't had a chance to examine the entire budget and understand its full implications. It's a serious budget, Vashi, a critical budget at a critical time, and it deserves, I think, a really good, thorough, comprehensive look at it, and we'll analyze it as a whole. But I'm well aware that 6 months ago we just had an election, The country is in fairly serious economic problems. I don't think Canadians want an election. Right. I don't think we particularly need one. But again, that's up to Mr. Carney. I want to ask maybe whether or not he's open to making changes to this budget. That may be a possibility as well.
Is that something that you'd be interested in? You
Absolutely.
would pursue that with him?
We're going to talk as a caucus tomorrow, and if this budget is not good enough yet, that's an option for us to do.
I just have one final question for you, and it's about something you said over the weekend, in which you laid out the possibility that nothing was off the table, including abstention. And I think for a lot of Canadians, when you just describe the moment we're in, the important context of this moment, the significance of this document against the backdrop of that moment, how can you at the same time say it's okay to sit this one out?
Well, abstaining isn't sitting something out. It's taking a position. One of the interesting things about this moment is we're not only examining the budget and whether or not it's good for Canada and Canadians, but the unique implication of this right now is that it could cause an election 6 months after another election. That's not usually the case. So that's something that weighs on us. I'm a Jack Layton New Democrat. Jack said it's our job to come here to Parliament and make it work for Canadians. We want to be propositional. We want to be positive. I want to focus on policies that will help Canadians who are suffering. 50% of Canadians in this country are living paycheck to paycheck fashion. So they've sent us here not to play political games or to decide what's in our partisan interests, but can we work together and find solutions to make lives better for those people? That's my first priority.
But what
and that's
does
what we'll focus
abstention
on.
fit into? How does abstention fit into that? It is sitting it out. Instead of taking a stand one way or the other, it is sitting it out. And I'm not sure that's what Canadians elected New Democrats to do here.
Well, it's one of the options we have. I guess it's suitable in a position where the budget is not in a position where we can support it. They haven't earned, let's say, an MP's votes, but perhaps neither do they want to bring down the government and go to an election.
Is that your position?
No, that's the objective position that
But
would
you
express.
haven't landed on
that's
that yet.
why no, that's why it's a totally legitimate option in this case. You can vote yes, you can vote no, you can abstain, and each one of those positions has an implication on whether this government exists, survives or not. And so we're going to take serious consideration to all of them.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Davies, I appreciate your time as always.
Thank you
very much. Don Davies is the interim leader of the New Democratic Party. We're going to get more reaction from other opposition parties, including after a short commercial break. The government House leader, the House leader of the Conservatives, the government's finance minister, will be here a little bit later on. We're back in a moment with more of this special edition of Power Play from the House of Commons.
Dad, what are you doing?
Just giving him a little toast.
Pierre Poilievre to deliver his reaction in the House of Commons. After that happens, we'll talk to the Conservatives House Leader, Andrew Scheer. But we have heard, as I mentioned there, from all the other parties. So we've got a special edition of The Front Bench to unpack what happens now. Joining me this evening, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is here. He's the CEO now of Space Canada. CTV's political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. Next to him, that's of course Tom Mulcair, our political analyst at CTV and former leader of the federal New Democrats. Next to me here in the foyer of the House of Commons is Stephanie Levitt. She's a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you tonight. Steph, I'll start with you because you're right here. You were listening to everyone. I feel like it's a clear no from Blanchette, a clear no from Elizabeth May, anything but a clear no from Mr. Davies. It looks like, a hard maybe and a probably, if anything, abstain.
Yes. I mean, it seemed he said something, to the reporter's question about this. Two things that were interesting. What about abstaining? And he made a reference to the fact that maybe there are some MPs in caucus who, for whatever reason, don't want to vote with everybody else in caucus. So that obviously opens a door for some MPs to carry the weight here of saying, you know what, we don't love this budget, we also don't want an election right now. And that's probably the line that's the safest for everybody to walk, because Mr. Davies was also asked the question, how does a party that's presents itself as like the voice of unions, progressive Canadians, vote for a budget that has tens of thousands of job cuts in it? And he explained that they're not actually sure how they're going to do that.
Yeah, they're going to meet tonight, Tom, and discuss it. But I just finished interviewing Mr. Davies, and he was kind of even defending the idea of abstention, which to me leads me, he may not have the ultimate say over caucus because it is fairly disparate. But if it were up to him, I do not think they would be forcing an election over this.
Fair enough, but an accident can happen. And Elizabeth May was so categorical, and it's understandable, getting rid of the tree planting program at a time when we know that just the 2023 wildfires destroyed 8.6 billion trees. Saying that we're getting rid of a program that was seeking to put back 2 billion seems unbelievable, especially since what they're actually cutting, because a lot of it's already committed, is peanuts. So it's a signal that they're sending on the environment. Talking about getting rid of the caps on oil and gas emissions, in case carbon capture and storage works. Hey, you know what, Vashi? Trees are great at capturing carbon. But that's the thing. The NDP is sort of stuck right now. They've got 7 people. And the inference that was just made with regard to the possible split, don't forget, it's their self-description. The 3 women who are the 3 racialized women in caucus felt very hard done by when the party decided that Don Davies was the leader. I don't think that wound is healed from what I've been getting. We're talking about MPs from Vancouver, Winnipeg, and Nunavut. And I have a feeling that the 3 of them might be saying, look, we're going to show that our votes count. And they've got, by the way, safer, if such a thing exists, safer NDP riding. So the party is in a bind right now. Don Davies was trying to skate around it. I was also there with Jack Layton. I never heard Jack Layton saying that anybody who abstained was actually doing their job in Parliament. I don't know a single person that in my life who's ever said, I want to go to Parliament so I can abstain. So I think they might have to work on their lines a little bit.
James, what do you think about the possibility of an accident happening here? And what's your sort of read on where this goes after hearing from various opposition leaders?
Well, and frankly, further to Tom's point, it was the abstention of Liberals in the 08 to 11 Parliament and Jack Layton skewering Michael Ignatieff in that leaders debate by saying you don't get a promotion at work if you fail to show up. So I mean, there is a legacy there that's being contradicted by Mr. Davies. I think what's going to happen between now and tomorrow. And by the way, Vashi, I don't know if there's an elegant way to try to nail Jell-O to a wall, but you tried very effectively there with Mr. Davies. But clearly they don't know where they're going to go. In part because of what Tom just mentioned about the dynamic in the New Democrat caucus. But I also have to think that the headline issue for progressive voters that Don Davies and the New Democrats want to sort of lasso themselves to, he's going to be looking at the response of CUPE and the Public Service Alliance and those public sector unions across the country and the amount of heat that they're going to have around this budget, because while there's an NDP leadership race going on, New Democrats need to, I think, reflect that heat. And if their opening position of those unions is going to be NDP to be red hot against Mark Carney and his positioning about those public sector cuts. The NDP have to align to that. Otherwise, why, frankly, do they exist? What the diminished party as they are, why do they exist if they don't echo those voices? So I think that's going to put Mr. Davies in a tough spot. He can't corral his caucus, and he has to reflect those voices from the outside. So I think they're in a very tough spot to reconcile where they're going to be.
Both Mr. Davies and Ms. May, Brian, indicated that they were hopeful there could be post-budget negotiations prior to a vote. What do you think the chances of that are?
I think it's possible. I mean, look, I think my colleagues are making great points. I'll make the one that is sort of underlying all of it as well. I mean, I think if a party is seen to throw us into an election, Canadians ain't going to be impressed. I think that would be probably the wrong thing to do at the wrong time, to say the least. People never really like an election, but certainly given the circumstances and how long has gone since the last one, I think people will be quite irritated about that. Nevertheless, you can still find yourself in a campaign. People will kind of posture to try to blame others, and people will ultimately still have to decide who their MPs and by extension their government will be. So you can still fall into an election even if everybody's pretty upset about it. Look, I think the post-negotiation can certainly happen. My sense, this is literally just by watching the media and sort of watching the Prime Minister and the posturing of the government, I think they're just going to basically say, look, this is the budget, and if you don't want to vote for it, go tell Canadians why you're sending us into an election. They'll probably have that somewhat publicly. I think behind the scenes, there have probably already been discussions with parties, most likely the NDP, and I would assume that they'll certainly reach out to see what would it take for you to support this. I think the Prime Minister feels certainly like he has some wind in his sails after a few months in government, and probably still a bit of a honeymoon to be able to ride this out and play this game of chicken, if you will. Not a game, but you get why I'm saying that. And I also think that the NDP and to some extent the Greens, but I think the NDP will feel a lot of pressure on their shoulders to basically say, are we ready to be potentially blamed for this sort of a new election campaign in 2025?
So if you are just joining us now, the federal budget has been tabled, and we are getting reaction into that budget from opposition parties. At the bottom of your screen, we've got some of the highlights of actually what is in the budget, and we've talked about the politics now for a second. If you take in the aggregate what is in this budget, Stephanie, what is the message that you think the government is actually, like, we know what they wanted to send, what are they actually delivering, do you think? Can you identify it?
I mean, I would say that there's a high-level takeaway for a lot of people, and it might be this. Over the last decade of Liberal government, the Canadian public has been really conditioned to believe when the government says we're going to transform your life, we're going to change your life, it means we're going to pay for your life. And in this instance, what we have is a government doing sort of the opposite of that. And they are turning to the private sector, and they're saying, your turn. We have done a lot of things over time. We are still going to spend some money, but as the Prime Minister once famously said in his days in the private sector and in the central bank, there's a lot of lazy corporate capital out there, and it's time for you guys to start spending and for us to spend less. That's interesting because it puts a lot of pressure on the corporate Canada to deliver on the promise Mr. Carney is making to Canadians. And if they don't build those new factories, change their production lines, do all of the things that he says is going to juice the Canadian economy, where does that leave him in the end?
Well, and he's attaching very specific numbers to that promise, Tom. He's saying $500 billion over 5 years in extra private capital will come into Canada. What do you think of that?
That's aspirational, as they like to say, but what I know is that they're promising, and this one they will deliver on, more than $300 billion in new debt on the backs of future generations over the next 5 years, because those are their own numbers, and that's at the very minimum. That's what they're going to be leaving on the backs of future generations. So we're not only leaving them a huge environmental debt, we're leaving them a huge economic debt, and there's no plan to get away from it. One of the problems that I see from a simple, basic political communications point of view, I watched the entry into the House of Commons by both Prime Minister Carney and Finance Minister Champagne, and they were doing the opposite of any good common sense. They were setting the bar so high. And then once he stood up, we just watched Champagne walk under that bar. He never met that bar. None of the promise of generational, transformational spending and change is there. Even the stuff about the public service is, well, we'll sort of let the baby boomers retire early and maybe we'll tap into a theoretical surplus in the pension funds to get them out faster. But there's no plan around that. You know, when Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien went after the years of deficit spending that we had, they did it seriously. Here it's just guesswork and, well, let's hope something proper comes of it. That's the problem. That, for me, is the basic flaw in this whole budget process that we've just seen. A lot of that spending's already taken place. That's not their fault. That is fair to say. But at the same time, they haven't done their part of the job, I don't think.
Are there too many, to Tom's point, assumptions built into what they're saying this budget will do for Canadians, James?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's blocks of funding, especially the bulk of new spending on the defense side. That's, you know, defense procurement is a challenge. A lot of that's going to go to salaries as well. And also on the tax incentive side for businesses to invest and reinvest back into the Canadian economy. Again, good policies, but they're going to take a long time to have sort of practical, real application and sense of accomplishment for the economy. By the way, the scale of deficits, I think to Tom's point, like, you know, the scale of deficits, you know, I was on your show just a couple days ago, Bashing, and I quoted the number from the fall economic update. $53 billion per year is what we're paying to service the debt. In the budget that was just tabled today, it's now over $70 billion. Again, to put that number in perspective, if as a revenue stream, you would have to have a 15% GST in this country to draw in the revenue necessary just to pay for the cost of servicing our debt. And that number is only going to grow over time. Another thing I noted, and I think it's worth mentioning as well, Vashi, is a clear pivot away from a lot of the policy legacy of Justin Trudeau in this budget, right? We saw it early with the elimination of the consumer carbon tax, the flip-flop backwards on the capital gains tax proposals that Minister Freeland had put in place, the emissions caps that have now been reversed on as well. And then there's this admission, like in the budget document itself, it says this, quote, if Canada's productivity growth had matched the United States from 2017 to 2023, the median income of a family of one child would be nearly $11,000 higher. Like, just explicitly in the budget saying that the last 10 years have failed. And that's text from a budget being delivered by François-Philippe Champagne, who was a key minister in that government. I don't know how these ministers are going to frankly survive if there's going to be credibility behind the actions of pivoting away from Justin Trudeau's policies, if his ministers are the people who are delivering lines like that.
Brian, I'll give you the last word on this, and in particular the content of the budget. I agree that a lot of this was aimed at sort of embodying what they did during the election campaign, which was try and say, I'm Mark Carney, I'm not Justin Trudeau. Why do you think that would be part of the political purpose of this document? And based on the content, what you've observed so far, do you think they delivered enough on that?
I think it's political posturing for sure, in the sense that they would have had the impression, I think most of us did, that Canadians were sort of done with the Trudeau era. So they're trying to put a demarcation line in the sand and say this is a new era. And also, I just think Prime Minister Carney is different than former Prime Minister Trudeau, and certainly has a different view on how the economy should work and where public finances should go and what type of programs there should be. So I think those two things make it that James is right to say it's pretty stark that it's actually in the budget and they're making that contrast. Look, I think the one thing about this budget that would worry me if I were them from a communications point of view, they're investing, they're cutting, they are letting the private sector take over. There's still major deficits of the government. It's a hard message to package this one kind of thesis. But governing is complex, and they're certainly not the first government that's going to have to try to figure out competing messages and how you kind of wrap that up so Canadians can understand what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay, I've got to take a quick commercial break. Our front bench, I think, will be with us throughout the rest of the evening as we aim to parse apart what this budget means for you and what it means politically. We're hoping that the leader of the Conservatives in the House of Commons, Andrew Scheer, will be our next guest. He is making his way to our set, and we'll be back with you in just a moment.
I'm a simple man, but now that I'm in my 50s, sometimes I feel like
of the House of Commons. We're continuing our coverage of the federal budget and reaction to it. To that end, I have with me here the House Leader for the Conservatives. Earlier, I teed you up as the government House Leader, but no, the House Leader of the Conservatives, Andrew Scheer, who's with me here in the foyer live. Mr. Scheer, before I get into your reaction to the budget, I got to ask you, we just got into our inbox. An MP of yours, Chris D'Entremont, has quit caucus, has resigned from caucus. Your reaction to that and what it says about your party?
Well, it's disappointing that Chris D'Entremont has decided that he doesn't want to fight for a more affordable life for Canadians, that he doesn't want to fight inflationary deficits that are driving up grocery prices in his riding. You know, he's now telling constituents that he just got their votes just a few months ago, that now he's in favor of the industrial carbon tax on things like farm equipment and fertilizer, driving up food costs, that he's in favor of fuel standards that the Liberals are imposing that's going to increase gasoline by 17 cents a litre. So, you know, he'll have to go back to the supporters in his riding that dug deep into their own pockets to support his campaign and explain why he took their precious time and resources and then turned their back on them just a few months later.
Might it be that he doesn't think your party's solutions are the correct ones now?
You know, he ran on them in the platform. He saw our platform and he said, yes, I support all this back in April when Conservatives were offering hope to young Canadians who couldn't find jobs, who had to move back in with their parents, back into their parents' basement. Our platform offered hope for young Canadians. Mark Carney's message is one of sacrifice, that Canadians who have been hammered hard by the cost of living crisis are going to have to sacrifice even more to feed a ever-growing budget, a deficit that's going to add billions to the national debt that has to be paid off with interest. So Mr. D'Entremont's going to have to explain that to his constituents.
And I hope we have definitely requested an interview, and I'll be asking him those questions. But ultimately, what does it say that there might be enough in this budget and the way in which this Prime Minister is governing to satisfy someone who ran just a few months ago as a Conservative? Does that not say something more largely about your party?
I wouldn't read too much of that. I know Mr. D'Entremont has had some personal grievances about the fact that he didn't get elected Deputy Speaker. He's been kind of upset about that. So I'm disappointed that he let his own personal grievances get in the way of his commitment to his constituents, that he would fight for a more affordable budget to bring down the cost of living, to lower the tax burden on Canadians. But again, he's going to have to explain to all the people that he looked in the eye, took their donations, put signs on their lawns, and then explain why he betrayed them just a few months later.
Let's talk a little bit about the content of the budget. This government is decreasing immigration, getting rid of climate policies your party wanted gone, and cutting the public service. If you believe, as you told Canadians during the election, that those things will better our country, isn't this budget worth supporting?
Why do you say they're shrinking the size of the federal
public service by 40,000 jobs?
Well, what I saw was a deficit of 55.6 billion. Sorry, that's public debt service. The deficit under Mark Carney is even bigger than under Justin Trudeau.
I didn't say they're not spending, but I'm saying that they are cutting the public service, which is something you advocated for.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of notional things that they're hoping Canadians will trust them that will actually come to fruition. When you see a government that's announcing new programs, massive amounts of new inflationary spending that's going to drive up that deficit, I don't see that as the government getting smaller. I see more and more Canadians having to work harder, pay more taxes to pay the interest on that debt that Mark Carney's racking up. I mean, what Mark Carney has essentially said is, after 10 years of inflationary deficits and massive overspending by Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney is saying the problem in Canada is that the government wasn't spending enough, that the deficit wasn't big enough, and that the debt was not big enough. You know that now under Mark Carney, more of your tax dollar is going to pay the interest on that debt than on health care? That's not sustainable.
I have a number of questions for the minister about the level of debt service charges, and I do take your point on that. I also think back to the last time we, as a country, were in a crisis, in 2008 and 2009. And I remember the Prime Minister at the time, Stephen Harper, spending a lot of money on infrastructure in order to stimulate the economy. When I look at the line items that add to increased spending to drive up that deficit, a huge chunk in this case is exactly that, is spending on infrastructure in order to spur economic growth against the backdrop of an economic crisis. Why was it okay then and not now?
Well, the difference was targeted investments after years of balanced budgets, bringing Canada's fiscal house back in order, versus now when we see a government that's really spending a lot of money on areas that's not going to benefit Canadians. There's not a single affordability measure in this budget, not a single thing that's going to lower grocery prices or reward hard work. This is a budget that's creating new ways for the government to spend money. It's bloating bureaucracies. All the things they're talking about are notional and far off. I look at the tables that they actually put in the budget. Investment's going down this quarter. It went down last quarter. They're projecting it to go down next quarter. This is all since Mark Carney's become Prime Minister.
So what would you have them do? Nothing? Because that's like, do you think that would resonate with Canadians? I mean, you're literally describing a situation where because of the economic crisis, investment is declining. Is there no role for government at all in stimulating a reversal of that in the same way that we did see Stephen Harper do it?
Oh, okay, I bristle when you say the choice is either what the Liberals have or nothing. You know, Pierre has outlined a lot of concrete measures to help stimulate investment in Canada. For example, exempting capital gains taxes from people who reinvest in Canada. That's a concrete measure that would help bolster that investment. I also object to the idea that there's an economic crisis that is just appearing on the horizon. Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, the Liberal government, purposefully tried to destroy the energy sector in this country. That's a sector that provides billions of dollars in investments. Mark Carney said he cheered on when when the Liberal government canceled Northern Gateway. He advised that the carbon tax was set too low. He supported all those policies that chased away all that investment. Now Conservatives are saying let's bring that investment home with things like cutting the capital gains tax on reinvestments in Canada. Mark Carney goes down to Washington and says his plan is to increase Canadian investment in the United States to try to appease Donald Trump. So he's really been all over the map when it comes to investment.
There are specific incentives, though, built into this budget that aren't just about spending to do exactly what you're stipulating, right? They signal that they're going to remove the emissions cap, which is something the Conservatives have long asked for in order to spur development on the energy side of things. They're extending the carbon capture tax credits, which oil companies specifically have been asking for, I think all the way out until 2040. And they're reducing the marginal tax rate. Like, isn't that exactly what you spelled out? And why are you sort of reflexively saying all of it is wrong?
Well, we're not reflexively. We had the budget documents throughout the day. We've been going through it, and one thing I did notice is that they are increasing the industrial carbon tax. So it's not really fair to say they're eliminating the production cap on oil and gas when they're increasing the carbon tax on that very same sector.
Do we know for sure it's going to increase? Because it sounded, when I read through it, it was like stabilizing it, making sure there's certainty. You know for sure that it's going to increase. I saw the word enhance, strengthen. Those are Liberal code words for it's going to. They actually, I believe, I'm correct in saying this, that they actually said that because they're doing these other measures on the industrial carbon tax, that would be the justification on the production cap. So they're literally saying because they're robbing Peter, they're able to pay Paul. We're not better off as a country when that happens. What we'd like to see is get rid of the industrial carbon tax altogether. We don't need, we used to live in a country where investors wanted to come into our country because we had lower tax rates and stable regulatory regimes. 10 years of Liberal government has made it virtually impossible to get anything built in this country. The only way that there's even a glimmer of hope is with a piece of legislation that allows them to bypass some of those projects just for the ones that the Prime Minister himself supports. So we've gone from a country where investors decide based on market conditions to politicians pick. That's not a sustainable way to grow an economy. There's really nothing in here, though, that you can see on the face of it that would do exactly what you're spelling out. And just to push back, with respect on the idea that everything that was done in the last 10 years led to a flight of investment, that wasn't true. FDI increased largely over the 10 years. In fact, investment in the oil sector increased as well. I know your argument's going to be, well, it could have increased a lot more.
Well, and the government had to spend billions of tax dollars to rescue TMX. That would not have happened before this Liberal government took office.
Yeah, but before that Liberal government took office, there wasn't a panacea of pipelines being built.
We had 4 major pipelines in the previous Conservative government, including
decreased the differential to the same degree.
Tidewater. We approved Northern Gateway. That was the pipeline that would have opened up Asian markets. That would have allowed us to sell our energy into China, into Japan, into India, all kinds of growing economies in Asia. The Liberals canceled that, and Mark Carney gave a big thumbs up and applauded Justin Trudeau when he did that. Look,
I'm just pointing out, it wasn't like a dearth of investment. It wasn't a total, there's nothing going on, and therefore anything they decide to do that builds on that this time around is inherently wrong.
Well, we have to look at the impact on this budget on Canadians. So what we see is an even bigger deficit and debt, and we know what that means. When you carry a balance on your credit card, you see what that interest does. That comes right out of your monthly income. That's exactly what happens with government. This is not sustainable. We've had the parliamentary budget officer, even the Bank of Canada governor, ringing the alarm bell that this is not sustainable. The government is now saying that they're going to borrow even more money than Justin Trudeau. They're going to have to go out into the markets and borrow billions and billions of dollars. That means that every other Canadian that has to renew their mortgage, buy their first home, get a small business loan, has to now compete with the government for borrowing that money. Mark Carney's increasing direct program expenses by $25 billion over Justin Trudeau's last level. So this is a government that has come in after, Mark Carney as a Prime Minister has come in after 10 years of massive deficits, ballooning government bureaucracy, and said the answer is even more.
Okay, I'm out of time, but I think, am I safe to convey to Canadians that your party will not support the budget?
We cannot support a budget that tells Canadians that they have to sacrifice even more. We can't support a budget that doesn't have any affordability measures to bring down the cost of things like groceries.
Okay, I have to leave it on that note. Mr. Scheer, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you, Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. We'll take a quick commercial break here on this special edition of Power Play. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne is still to come. Stay right there.
Sonic, to me, in one word, I would choose success. Because
of all the Canadians who can no longer afford to eat, heat, or house themselves because of Liberal inflation, we Conservatives cannot support this costly Liberal budget.
I hardly see how, after having met with our caucus tonight, we could vote in favor of this budget.
There are, some record investments, but it also is, cutting public services that Canadians need. So this is something that we'll be taking a very close look at.
There are several days in which this budget can be negotiated and amended before it goes to a vote.
The federal budget has been tabled in the House of Commons, and there is reaction from opposition party leaders, largely, aside from the NDP's interim leader, Don Davies, who say they will not support this budget. We're in a minority government, so that really matters. Opposition support will be essential for passing the budget. I'm here with our front bench. They're back, Brian Gallant, James Moore, and Tom Mulcair. James, I might just start with you on the other news of the day, which we just spoke to Mr. Scheer about. Chris D'Entremont, Atlantic Canada MP, I believe from Nova Scotia, deciding to leave caucus. Any initial reaction to that?
One more vote for Mark Carney. Conservative caucus is a little bit smaller. Quite frankly, I don't know that many people outside of his riding or Parliament Hill really know who he is. But, certainly a bit of a shot to Pierre Poilievre. But I don't think it's a broader material consequence past the budget vote in terms of, the Conservative caucus.
Significant at all, Brian, that it's happening on budget day?
Significant in the sense that it feels quite planned. Obviously, you sort of do it now in a bit of a maximal hit to the Conservatives and maybe a bit of a plus for the Liberals in the sense that I saw the budget and it's a good one, and or I don't like the reaction of my leader. So it was planned, obviously, and look, the numbers are such that one extra vote will potentially make a difference.
Tom, what do you think about that?
Well, Don Trumeau is a well-liked person, and by the way, being from Nova Scotia, a lot of people in that province really like Mr. Carney, and he's one of those people who's been around the House. He knows the rules. He'll be very helpful in caucus, and his French is pretty nigh fluent, so pretty darn good catch for the Libs, I have to say.
Let's circle back to the budget. That's obviously why we're here today. James, do you think that the government accomplished a story out of this budget, like a specific story that they can now take on the road and tell Canadians and that will resonate with them?
Not really. Look, one of the, I think, golden rules of politics, and it's actually a good rule in life, right, is under-promise and over-deliver. And this government, I think, from day one has been doing the inverse of that, and I think it's a problem. The challenge, I think, that this budget is going to have in the fullness of time is that we're actually in a bit of a race against time here. You know, on the positive side and the best possible interpretation of what this budget could mean, you know, more spending on major projects, well, that's positive. More spending on military procurement, that's positive. And salaries, that's positive. You know, the tax measures to incent more reinvestment by business into the economy, those things are positive. But there's a long lag between the announcement of this policy, the implementation of it, and seeing those things be realized in terms of real economic benefit. On the other side, we have the constant threat of Donald Trump and the tariff imposition. We have a slowdown of the Canadian economy that's happening, a narrowing of the job picture in a very negative way, especially for young Canadians. And in the budget itself, they show a ramping down of immigration inflows into the country, and we know that the overinflated immigration inflows into the Canadian economy has artificially bumped up the Canadian economy, so there's going to be a downward pull there as well. So the measures in their best possible outcome are going to have a longer impact, sort of ramp-up phase, if you understand what I'm saying. And but the negative draws on the economy are going to be real. So there's a race against time to see these policies mitigate the risks to the Canadian economy. And there's going to be still a minority parliament and all the politics swirling around it as this is going on. So they definitely need to do a roadshow. Whether or not their narrative is going to be able to be persuasive to Canadians is going to be really a race against time.
Yeah, I imagine, and Brian, you kind of alluded to this in the last segment, like that is the conundrum they face. They've got these, you know, macro things that they're pitching, which in theory I very much understand could translate to improve my life down the road, particularly in the face of the threat to the United States. But if I am unable to pay for $12 berries tomorrow, like there isn't even really much of an acknowledgement in here that that's the case. And I'm not saying they have a magic policy to fix that, but even from a communications perspective, they didn't put a whole lot of effort into addressing that.
Well, let me build on what I was saying and what James was saying as well. I do think they're going to have a bit of a tough time to be able to have this sort of central narrative from this budget. As I explained in the last segment, I mean, that is normal for governments. Maybe a little more pronounced this time, though, because we have somebody that's coming in that I think has a brand of being fiscally responsible, even though obviously it's his first time in government, but given his previous positions and his background. So I think people are going to say to themselves, okay, he's going to manage the budget well and he's going to make good investments for the economy. And that may be the case, but the narrative that they're going to have to go with is, yeah, we're making these investments, and you saw them all get up, right? $1 trillion of investment over 5 years, I think they said, and they're all clapping and they get up. And that's a message that maybe they think will resonate to some extent, but then at the same time, they're going to be talking about some of their expenditure reductions, talking about some of the civil servant that will be that will have some attrition going. So those aren't going to jive incredibly well. And to your point on the affordability, I think Scheer had a good line, right, to use. Basically, there's nothing in this budget about affordability to help affordability. I mean, I think Prime Minister Carney, in his view and the way he would describe it, is we need to create economic activity. We need to get more jobs. We need to sort of be able to get our house in order when it comes to the Canadian economy. And then we're going to have these opportunities for Canadians to make more money. But obviously, to your point, Vashi, that's not a great explanation for somebody that's having a tough time paying a bill this week. So again, yet another challenge that they're going to be facing when it comes to communicating the benefits of the budget.
Well, and the other assumption that's built in there is that this stuff that they've put in the window in this budget, Tom, will accomplish that, right? And I'm not saying that it won't, but like James said, they're facing very difficult and unpredictable headwinds from the United States that could actually make the situation, for example, if CUSMA is at risk next year, much worse before it even starts to get better.
Yeah, I think that Jim's analysis of what's going to hit first, and as opposed to the theoretical stuff that's supposed to help, is spot on. It's unassailable. But I also think that the average Canadian has built a lot of that into their reasoning right now. And I do think that Carney has a storehouse of good faith on the part of most Canadians who say, look, this guy was dealt the hand that he's got. Trudeau left an absolute mess in terms of public finance and public administration. Trump is stranger by the week and the month. We're never sure what's actually going to happen. Even the most recently announced 10% tariffs haven't materialized, and we just don't know which foot we're supposed to be dancing on. So it's a very tough situation. I do think there's a lot of indulgence there. But I also believe that the fundamental mistake of overselling just how good this budget is going to come back to haunt them. I remember, I worked quite a bit because I was the NDP's finance critic then with Jim Flaherty, who had a very easy way of talking to ordinary folks and to Bay Street. And I'm looking at François-Philippe Champagne. I'm not taking anything away from his abilities, but I'm not sure he's got the capacity to talk to average folks the way Flaherty could. Maybe he's got an audience on Bay Street, especially with some of the announcements today with regard to the tax system. But overall, it's going to be a very tough sell now that they've pitched it as being transformational, generational. For future generations, it ain't great, because on the environment, Elizabeth May's right. This budget really falls short. Mark Carney knows more about the environment than any leader of the G7, but somehow his stamp didn't appear in this budget.
There's also and Tom referenced this, and so did Brian, James, but the spending side of the ledger, or the savings side, I should say, right? And on that, I read through every part of the budget, and it was like, this department will do this department will do this, but the word redundancy was used, I think I counted 17 times. Like, the specifics were not necessarily there outside of the job adjustments, as they call them. Do you see what they have announced on that side of things as impactful or profound, or living up to the way in which they telegraphed it would be?
Well, we'll see, but I'm not going to hold my breath. It's kind of reading the budget document as well, Vashi. It's kind of like, the guy who you went to high school with, who's always planning on starting a business. He's always planning on going on a trip. He's always planning on starting a new diet. He's always planning on doing something, but it never kind of happens. These promises of reevaluation of government spending in a really big tectonic way that deliver real measurable results, they've been promised for a really long time, but they don't actually materialize. But building on Tom's point as well about the politics of this, and something that I think is missing, is that it seems to me when you read the budget document at a very high level, this budget document reads like it was written by an economist who has a majority government on his side and lots of runway in front of him. And half of that is true. And so what's missing from this budget are sort of the retail aspects of politics that are necessary. A 7% to 6% to 5% GST cut, a universal child care benefit, a tax credit, something tangible that people can feel on day one when the budget is passed. That'll put a little bit of cash in their jeans and a little bit of flexibility in their monthly budget. There's practical stuff that's not here, that's not tangible. So their sales pitch is going to have to be the macro and Trump and the fears and anxiety that the Canadians do feel. And believe me, sunnier days are going to come. The cuts may happen now, the disappointments might be now, but the benefits will be in the future. And that's not super satisfying to people who are looking for a couple $100 more now to give them a little bit of breathing room so they can feel a little confident about their spending picture going into the Christmas break. Like, it's just not there on the practical retail side of politics.
It's interesting because, I know there's a lot of criticism among this version of the Liberal Party and other parties, Brian, for the previous Trudeau government. But often in budgets, that party, under Trudeau did a good job of that, right? There was something in there that you could say is different for my life tomorrow, whereas it's very hard to ascertain that in this budget. Does that ultimately impact their ability to have it resonate with Canadians? Like, is this going to feel generational for Canadians tomorrow?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of layers to that question, in the sense that when you announce something that is a little more retail, as James is suggesting, there's no question that that can be more easily understood. People will talk about it at the dinner table. They'll talk about it when they're sort of waiting for their kids to pick them up at daycare. And they'll say, hey, did you hear about that tax credit? Did you hear about that new program? That's going to be great for us, great for whatever. Yeah, not a lot of that in here. There's no question. But at the same time, another layer to your question, I think, also has to be that I think a lot of people would have criticized the Trudeau era with too much of that and not enough on the macro, and being worried about where are we really going with all of this and what is the plan for us to increase our productivity and ensure that we're prosperous for years to come. What's the plan for our finances? I mean, I think that was probably a big criticism. So most likely there's a lot of, whether it's people from the Trudeau government, Carney himself, that are saying, no, like, we're going to change our approach and we're going to focus on the macro. Now, the third layer and last layer I'll share is the communications. Although I think a lot of Canadians might say to themselves, yeah, maybe it is time we focus a little bit more on the sort of bigger themes and less on the retail stuff. The communication of it will be difficult. There's no question. It's very hard to try to explain these big concepts in small little tidbits. And certainly when there's going to be other things that might be a little more interesting for media to cover.
Tom, the last 30 seconds goes to you. Mr. Champagne, the finance minister, has just sat down next to me, so I got to give Tom Mulcair the last word.
I know.
Yeah,
I sat in the house when he was there, and he's very good. So
he wants to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. For sure.
I'll ask him why he doesn't put back the $2 billion tree program. Getting rid of it makes no sense at all when we've lost over 8 billion trees to wildfires just during the 2023 season.
Okay, we'll put that question to the minister in a moment. Tom's worried about the 2 billion trees. Thank you so much. Tom Mulcair, Brian Gallant, and James Moore, our front bench panel. And as I did telegraph, the Minister of Finance, François-Philippe Champagne, does join me live right here in the foyer. Minister, it's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Well, it's good. You have a great panel.
Yeah, I do. I'm very lucky. Minister, in this budget, you substantially increased the size of the deficit and debt load. Based on a pitch that you will catalyze $500 billion in additional private investment in this country over the next 5 years, how do you know that will happen?
Well, first of all, it's not how much you buy or borrow, but why. And I think that's really the question that this budget answers, because people understand now better the difference between expense and investment. This is an investment budget. So the money that is going to be borrowed, you saw that in 28-29, we're going to be matching our operating expenses with our revenues. So what you will see after these years is really investment in the Canadian economy. And why I believe in that, just take the example of a mine. So think about the last mile and the first mile and last mile tax credit we have offered, for example, or the one for critical mineral. Well, if you do these kind of things, you're enabling, obviously, private investment. I would say Canada will be the most competitive jurisdiction on a tax basis, probably of the OECD. And then you would catalyze it by the province, by the municipality, and obviously, first and foremost, the private sector. So this is really to supercharge growth. You know, you've seen the super deduction we've done for people who want to invest in plant and equipment, in technology, in building. I mean, we're addressing the productivity and competitiveness challenge that this country has been facing for a very long time. So that's why I think this is an investment budget, and the way for us to grow our economy is to invest and to provide the incentives in order for the private sector to bring and to have these investments in our country.
And I do take that point, but I am, I would say my impression after going through the budget is the pitch is we have to spend this much. I know you're going to say invest, but you're spending money, you're spending taxpayer money in order to garner a significant growth in the return on investment. And my question to you is, like, how do you know that return will come? And I put to you with great respect, you were the ministry who oversaw decisions to put a ton of taxpayer money into the EV sector that is now blowing up in all our faces.
Well, I mean, don't take it from me, take it from the International Monetary Fund, who first said the two countries of the G7 and in the world that stand out is Canada and Germany. And secondly, they said, well, smart economies that have the fiscal capacity. And when I say it's generational, what we've done in Canada compares very well to what Germany has been doing, which is the largest economy in Europe, and their generational infrastructure plan that you've seen. And what the International Monetary Fund said is that countries should be investing in infrastructure, in housing and productivity, because that's where you have the greatest multiplier. So obviously, when you make these investments, you know the multipliers. and you can see the impact on the economy. And that's why I say this is the kind of thing we needed to do in this country. People understand at home we have some headwinds. The world has changed. We live in a very different world, and the way forward for us, and I know you would want to use the word spending, but folks at home understand. When you go to the grocery store, you spend. When you buy a house, you invest. For government, it's about the same. You know, we need to, that's why we did the tough exercise of finding $60 billion, because we say we need to spend less to invest more, put our house in order. Canadians have been doing it at home. They've been tightening their belt. We did the same. But now it's the time to grow the economy, invest in housing, in our defense and our sovereignty.
And I do have questions about those savings. But as you speak, it reminds me so clearly of a message you delivered as a different kind of minister under a different prime minister, but from the same party. When over and over the refrain from your government at the time was confident Canadians invest in themselves. And the promise was also for economic growth. Instead, what happened on a per capita basis is that GDP declined by 2.5% below pre-pandemic levels over the last 5 years. Liberals were not able to deliver on the promise that you're making tonight. Why is this time any different?
But in fairness, Vashi, in fairness, the world has changed. I mean, people understand at home. The scope, speed, and scale of the change, I wish you would be at the G7 with me. When we sit together, we say what we're seeing today is unprecedented, probably since 1945. So you can compare a period before the world changed, when our largest trading partner decided to change the rules of the game, not only for Canada, but for the world. You know, pretty much every country of the world.
I understand.
So the world has changed so significantly that you can compare these two periods. It's like if you...
But really, because you're saying the exact same things. We need to invest in ourselves in order to get a return on the investment, and you're guaranteeing that will come when it never did before.
Well, I would say if you look at the things where you invest, and don't take it from me, go back to the International Monetary Fund, what they say. You don't need to take it from me.
You're the minister, though. I want to take it from you. Canadians are looking to you for answers.
I've been saying it very loud and clear. If you invest in infrastructure, if you invest in housing, if you invest in productivity and competitiveness, that's the way to grow the economy. And by making these investments, that's how we can make sure. That's why we say our investment will enable $1 trillion of investment, because if we're, my example of the mine, if you have, because of the incentive, the private sector investing, municipalities will be building a community around the province. Think about the Ring of Fire will come and will do their part. That's the kind of thing we need in this country. So we are investing in the type of things that will make Canada stronger. We have the fiscal capacity. There's only about 2 countries which in the G7 people would recognize to say have the capacity. And so we're taking that fiscal capacity to make sure we grow the economy. And by growing the economy, that's how you protect jobs. That's why you have the future. My message to people at home, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. It's a tough world. It's very different. You and I have lived different crises, but this one is like we've not had seen in a long time. But we're going to be okay because we've put our finance in order. We have the fiscal capacity. We're going to invest smartly. At the same time, we'll reduce our operating expenses.
So you flagged, for, as an example, mines, right, in the Ring of Fire, and that's and critical minerals, all part of the energy sector. What we had heard from that sector, loud and clear heading into this budget process, was in order to spur growth of the sector, they would need to see things that they've identified as irritants removed. You have, in this budget, signaled, not said for sure, but signaled that the emissions cap will be removed. You haven't actually repealed it. But what about other stuff? What about the tanker ban? What about C-69? If you truly wanted to catalyze private investment and economic growth in the energy sector, why are you only bringing about half measures to do it?
Well, look at the major project office. Look at LNG Canada 2. Look at the project we have selected. Look at the Port of Montreal expansion. I mean, we may not talk to the same people, but when I talked to the CEOs, they were very happy about what they saw because they understand that now we're making that shift towards growth. We're having the major project office. We are now, if you look at the marginal effective tax rate, which is really not what necessarily people at home would look, but if you're a chief financial officer of a company, what you're looking is how much is the tax rate. Canada is more competitive than the Americans now. Imagine. So you're talking to a company, and most Canadian companies have operation on both sides of the border. Today, with this budget, Canada is more competitive than investing in the United States. That's a huge thing, because when people have a choice, they will decide where we are competitive. So we are more competitive on the tax side. We have put a number of measures for critical minerals. We're going to power the economy of the 21st century. When it comes to major project, we said, you know, one project, one review, we're going to do better. And those that I've talked to would say, Minister, we've been listening to the business community. We've been listening to investors. We say, what would you need to make Canada the place to invest? And honestly, with the measures we have in the budget today, you know, on the tax side, on the tax credit, think about the super deduction.
With respect, though, Minister, are you talking to the conventional energy players in this country who have felt as though their ability to expand has been greatly hindered by the policies that your government, the previous government, put in place? There is an acknowledgement of that in here in the removal of, or the intended removal, not explicit removal, intended removal of the emissions cap. But beyond that, if you were truly serious about supercharging the conventional energy sector, making us an energy superpower, why would you not do more in that vein? That wouldn't cost taxpayers anything.
Well, listen, it's already a lot. I mean, look at, we're going to be more competitive than the United States. That's a shift that we've not seen in a long time. And this is even after the big, beautiful thing. You think that's going to get a pipeline built? Well, I would say this is going to make the investment in Canada, you know, if people have a choice, they're looking at these type of things. And when you talk to the sector, I mean, I don't know, we may have talked to different people, but when I talk to the CEOs in the sector, they've seen what Canada's doing. They see the major project office. They see that we're serious. They've seen the tax credit. They've seen the approach we're taking to make sure that we are a global energy superpower. Look at LNG Canada, too. Canada will be one of the countries in the world. That has been in development for 10 years. With all due respect, it was put on the major projects list because it's just needs to get over the finish line. But we should be happy.
I'm not
you should
saying
be happy. I mean, there's something to be happy in the budget.
There's the potential for another oil pipeline. My question to you is whether what you're doing is going to incentivize
Well,
that.
I would say when you are the most competitive tax jurisdiction, when you compare to the U.S., that is incentive that people will look at. We've talked to the people in the sector, and I would say we should really look at what we've done for Canada. This is a generational shift. We're taking steps that are going to make Canada look very different, provide prosperity, provide jobs, provide growth. And at the same time, we're doing the smart thing that we need to do for a long time, and the time is to do it now. And so that's why I think if you look on the tax side, I'm very, very confident because compare that to the United States. That's what you need to do, Vashi, because you have to compare what we do to the U.S.
The amount of conventional energy investment in the United States has been going at a rate that far exceeds anything that's being happening in Canada. But I take your point. You think it's going to change?
Okay. Give me a chance. We just issued the budget an hour ago.
I hope for the best.
Give me a chance.
One final question, if you don't mind, Minister. I know your time is limited, and I do want to ask on behalf of Canadians who are listening tonight and listening to your points about how what you've done in this budget is intended to spur economic growth over the mid to long term, and wondering why isn't there something in this to help me pay for $12 berries tomorrow, to help me pay for groceries that have increased by 30%, for example, over the last 5 years. I'm old enough to remember not too long ago when you were the Minister of Industry, you said we're going to get those prices down. That didn't materialize. Why isn't there more in this budget to address the immediate affordability needs of Canadians?
Well, that's the first thing we did, was to reduce taxes for 22 million Canadians.
But they're still hurting.
Well, and that's why we need more affordability measure. But one of the
Why aren't they in the budget?
Well, there's one, which it calls about building Canada homes, because if you can build more affordable housing in the country, you're making that more affordable for Canadians. So there are a number of things in the budget to make life more affordable for Canadians. Affordability of homes is one of the most concerning things across the nation, and we're acting on that. So I would say if you're a Canadian today, look at the measures we've put, for example, for workers that have been affected. Because you say, if you look at the trade with the United States, if you're a steel worker today, or if you're in the lumber industry, if you're in the coal, these things have been hurting. And when you refer to the deficit, 75% of what we did this year was for our sovereignty or affordability. Look at the measure in the budget. You mentioned you started with the deficit, but if you look at it, a good part of that was really to make life more affordable for Canadians and making sure that we take steps to make life more affordable, to protect our workers, to support our industry, to pivot our industry. So I would say Canadians will recognize themselves in this budget, and it's really a turning point for Canada where we make sure that our borrowing is to support growth. And that's what we're going to be doing on a going forward basis.
The NDP wants post-budget negotiations. Will you provide that?
Well, I think that the Canadians have heard, and there's so many measures there. I mean, even the Canadian Labour Congress came out and said, this budget.
I'm just asking, are you willing to negotiate with them? They're saying
listen to the Canadian Labour Congress, which said, thanks God, this government have put workers at the heart of their economic strategy. That's pretty convincing to me. It's not me saying
that. Is that a yes or a no?
Well, you should ask them. I'm sure they're going to come on your show. I come all the time. You invite me. Maybe they'll come.
Okay, we hope to see you again soon. Minister, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, fresh off, of course, delivering the federal budget in the House of Commons. We are going to continue to have a ton of reaction to that budget throughout the evening and into tomorrow right here on CTV News Channel. That does it for this special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.